actually in. We're going to talk today about cost-effective document design for documents that you're intending to put through a translation workflow. My name is Nick Rosenthal. Ethan's very kindly introduced me. There's just a brief recap. I'm originally a professionally qualified translator. Over the years, I've moved more into the documentation workflow side of things and spent a lot of time on the interface between clients who are producing documents and the translation side of the business. Why is documentation design important at all? I'm going to assume here that you're perhaps translating into a bit of a range of languages. Let's take an example of a client who might be working into 5 languages. Maybe they write originally in English and then produce translated versions in 4 languages. My company actually has clients where they're going into 12 or even 16 languages. And if you get something that works in English but doesn't really work in layout terms in the foreign languages, then sorting that out becomes very expensive because you're sorting it out 4 times or 12 times or 16 times. So probably my headline concept I'd like to give people to take away is that in the context of a company with documentation that's being produced in different languages, English really is just another language. It's not the most important language, and then there's the translations. It's just one of the languages that you're communicating with your client base in. So really we need to think pretty much from the start in terms of multiple languages and making sure that the multiple languages work. What are the financial implications of this? Well, one of the figures that I see bandied around when I'm at documentation conferences and translation conferences is that for conventional user manuals, and I'm talking here about user guides that are produced perhaps in FrameMaker, perhaps in Quark Express, maybe in Word, up to 50% of the translation budget can go on manually tidying the layout in each language. And obviously if you're going into several languages, that can really mount up in terms of an absolute cost. So I guess the intention here is that by spending a bit up front, we can sort the layout of the original English in such a way as to try and save the need to go hands-on manually in each individual language. One of the very best ways of achieving a saving here is separating form and content. Historically, form and content were kind of mixed up, and you couldn't really address the one without addressing the other. And over the last handful of years, we've seen options come in such as XML-based documentation, maybe using something like DITA, or maybe using a different form of XML. And that enables us to separate the form and the content. The joy of doing that is that the translators are free to translate the content, which is actually really what you want them doing. You want those translations to be as clear as possible, as readable as possible, and to be presented in a logic form which is easy for the foreign readers to take on board. And the publishing system then automatically looks after the form, after the layout. And the key word there is automatically. Certainly using something like the DITA Open Toolkit, you can set things up and with a little bit of investment of time, energy and money up front, you can have the system itself do most of the actual layout in the different languages. And that clearly brings a cost saving for you overall. Obviously there's an upfront cost to doing that, but if your translation budget is, I don't know, $300,000 or $500,000 a year, then it's certainly worth thinking about spending $50,000 or $100,000 on getting a good systemized basis set up, and well worth spending money on some consultancy fees. Talk to people like Scriptorium on that. I wanted to make the point that in this webinar I'm talking really about document design, about layout issues, not really about issues of writing for translation. You know, we could talk about things like you know, don't use very specific references, like, you know, something is half the size of Rhode Island, because to those of us who don't live in the States, Rhode Island's not really a concept. But as a general guideline when thinking about will the translators understand, I'd like to introduce two famous American dancers. There's a lovely quote about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and I think somebody was interviewing him and said to him, what does he do? And he went on at great length about what a wonderful dancer he was, and they turned to her afterwards and said, and what do you do? And she said, exactly the same as him, only in high heels and backwards. And the point I'd make is that translators are qualified professionals as well, and qualified translators should, you know, really be able to understand pretty much anything that you write. And if they're not, then it's pointing at some other problem there. What translators won't necessarily have is the expertise that you have as technical authors in document production techniques. So they may not be quite as familiar with some of the deep level stuff in FrameMaker. They may not be quite as familiar with XML and with DITA. But certainly in terms of understanding the content in the manual, that really should not be a problem. Localizing user guides, I mentioned earlier, systemize as much as possible. What we're looking to do here is to get a cost saving by minimizing the amount of manual tidy up after translation. And as I mentioned, a bit of money spent here on consultancy on the original document design and layout can save a great deal of money. I'm going to move on in a minute and show you some actual examples of some of the stuff that I mean here. The manual tidy up tended to occur historically, primarily because translations tend to run somewhat longer than the English. Ironically, that seems to happen the other way around as well. If you translate French manuals into English, they seem to need a little bit more space as well. So I guess this is a globalized concept. Screen clips is a major starting point, I think, when you're looking at your document design. How you actually put that document together. Clearly, if you're using an XML-based workflow, then you're looking at externally linked graphics files. I'm thinking here of something like a user guide or perhaps a help system for some sort of software application, or perhaps something that uses a printer driver. And you start out with a set of English screen clips in the user guide, and you've started off perhaps by having the application itself localized. Once that's done and compiled, either you or the translation vendor have taken screen clips in the foreign languages, and you then need to get the German screen clips in the German manual, the French screen clips in the French manual, the Polish screen clips in the Polish manual. And it's looking for a cost-effective way to do that. And I think the big no-no is do not simply embed the screen clips into your Word file. That's the very worst way to do it, because you then end up with hundreds of screen clips, and some poor soul has to go through trying to identify which one to drag where in the Polish. If the screen clips all look very different, that might work. It's just going to be tedious and expensive. If you've got 3 or 4 variants of screen clips that look very similar to each other, then it also increases the risk of something going wrong somewhere. So our recommendation is always to use externally referenced graphics files and to keep exactly the same names when you save the screen clips in each of the languages. Just use a different folder structure for each language.